Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of our Alumni Conversations webinar series. Our guest today is Dr. Frank Wendt. Dr. Wendt graduated from the UNT Health Science Center Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences with his PhD in 2018. He is currently a National Institute of Mental Health postdoctoral fellow at the Yale School of Medicine, Division of Human Genetics and Psychiatry, and a genetic epidemiologist affiliate of the Connecticut Veteran Affairs Healthcare System. Thank you so much, Dr. Wendt, for speaking with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, we will just jump right into it. So you began your career as a forensic science undergraduate student at Penn State. Was forensic science a path you saw yourself on before beginning college, or was it something that you became interested in while studying at Penn State? And what drew you to that field of study?
So I actually was not a very focused student in high school. I really had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And sometimes I actually still think that may be true. But
Sure.
so I sort of explored some options for what I wanted to do in college. And actually, it was my dad that suggested that I maybe consider something in STEM. And sort of, what year was this? 2008, 2009-ish. CSI was a really big deal on TV. So I went into forensic science for the same reason that sort of everybody else does. And that was because of CSI.
Okay.
And Penn State, I'm from Pennsylvania. So Penn State was really sort of a natural landing point because they do have a really great program. So yeah, it was sort of staying close to home, but also doing some things that I was a little bit unfamiliar with and sort of diving in.
Sure. Well, for someone who didn't have it figured out, maybe in the beginning, you sure seem to be doing well. So that's awesome, and good to know that you don't have to have it all figured out in high school. So I think that's comforting.
And I still don't. So
yeah. Well, that's very comforting, I think, to our students and even to me in my career. So thank you for that. How did your undergraduate experience lead you to pursuing your PhD under the mentorship of Dr. Bruce Podoli here in the Center of Human Identification at the Health Science Center?
Yes, I really like this question because I think that this gives me a unique opportunity to say that like many of the viewers and the people that I know at the Health Science Center can relate to, my trajectory is very much dependent on a whole group of people, right? This is not just really me making some decisions for myself. It's a reflection of mentorship from several levels of my academic experience. So most of my sort of initiative to go to the Health Science Center to work with Bruce stems from that training at Penn State, right? So I am going to name a little bit here because then everybody gets some attention. But
Sure.
so there are four people primarily at Penn State that really collectively pushed me towards the Health Science Center: Mitch Holland, Rena Roy, Ralph Ristenbat, and Jenny Smith. At the time, I was doing research with Mitch, and I was a teaching assistant for both the undergraduate and the graduate level coursework that was being taught by Rena, Ralph, and Jenny. And when I sort of expressed this potential interest in grad school, it was this collective aha moment for all of them that said, you know, if you're going to do a PhD and it's going to be something that has any relationship to forensic science, then it really needs to be with Bruce, right? There is no other option. You must go work with Bruce Podoli. So that sort of pushed me in that direction, but it also really helped that at this time, the project that I was working on with Mitch at Penn State was in collaboration with a company outside of Pleasanton, California. It was a biotech startup. And Bruce, and at the time, one of his postdocs, Bobby LaRue, who has now moved on to do wonderful things, was doing a similar project with a separate piece of a much larger analysis for this company. So in some ways that we didn't particularly realize, we sort of converged on a research topic that we were both working on, but also from some common names in our collective network. In terms of my skills and my preparation for going to the Health Science Center, Penn State's undergrad program in forensic science is in many ways a graduate program without the title. It was hard, it was time consuming, it was rigorous, and it was, to be quite honest, not for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I was challenged, very much academically, obviously, but also sort of ethically and morally. The program is small, so we're given a lot of responsibility. We're given a lot of time to sort of do things on our own within the framework of the program.
Mm-hmm.
So you're really making a lot of decisions for yourself. And I think that sort of put me in a position to become a really good person, but also a really good team player.
Yeah.
And then sort of a specific note in there, at the Health Science Center in the PhD program, it is very much a short answer essay-based question format for your exams. And that was also true for the undergrad program at Penn State. So in many ways, that was something that I was already prepared for, and that's not necessarily true for a lot of people that go into a PhD program.
It was a more kind of seamless transition for you because you were familiar with the format and things like that of the exams.
Exactly.
And it seems like, our next question was about, the Center for Human Identification, but it seems like that was one of the biggest draws or reasons that your professors at Penn State really pushed you to go to the Health Science Center is because of Dr. Budoli and that Center of Human Identification.
Yes, yeah. So I actually, in addition to applying for PhD programs, I also was applying for jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one of my first conversations with Bruce when I got to the Health Science Center was like, listen, I don't know if you're taking students, but if you are, I'm interested. And if you are not, I'll go elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
Like I have other options, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if this is not a good fit for both of us, then that's fine, but we will, reevaluate our options. And I think that was something that maybe in hindsight was a little bit harsh, but I think was something that Bruce really valued, right?
Mm-hmm.
I came into his office, I knew what I wanted, and I knew what I wanted to get out of it. And I think that's a really, don't be that aggressive, but I think that's a really good piece of advice for a lot of people. Just, have some idea of what you're looking for and what you want to get out of those conversations with a potential mentor.
Absolutely. I think that's a great message that I would agree with. So kind of a more fun question, if you will. What's one of your favorite memories from either working with Dr. Budoli or just at your time at the Health Science Center? That could be a class, activity, professor, really anything.
So I also love this question, and I think I'm going to give you two answers.
Great. More the merrier.
One of them, I think I'm going to get a little bit of hate mail from, from maybe the student body, not so much the administration, but the student body. I really, really loved my oral qualifying exam.
Okay.
I know that's a super weird answer to give, but I remember Sunny Singh, who was the dean at the time, told me and many of my friends a little spiel about the oral qualifying exam that has stuck to me since then. That is the smartest and most capable you will ever be in your academic career, right? That's when you peak, right? You know the most at that point. Everything after that, you learn a whole lot of stuff about very little information. And I nailed it for that oral qualifying. I felt so good about myself at that point in time that I still think back to it today and I'm like, wow, that was just such a great day. It was supposed to be a really tough day, and it was, but it was also just a wonderful experience to go through. So now on a more lighter topic that people can hopefully relate to, I don't think that I would have been successful at the Health Science Center or even at any graduate school if I decided to go elsewhere without the Graduate Student Association. I used them as a resource for everything my first year. And then after that, I became vice president for a little while. I started a travel award platform that still exists today, although it's in a little bit of a different form. And all of my friends came from the GSA. And we are still friends today, and we are still connected today. And I think that's something that is just a very great experience for myself, but is also a really nice reflection of the family community among the alumni that leave the PhD program, and of course the master's program as well.
Absolutely. Well, two very great memories, very different, but I think, I hope students have both of those types of experiences. I hope they get that moment where they feel yes, I succeeded, I did so well. And then also I hope they make the connections and get as involved as you are. So I think those are both great memories to draw on. So kind of moving past your time at the Health Science Center, after graduating from HSC, you went on to work in Dr. Ronato Paul Montes' lab at the Yale University School of Medicine. What drew you to pursue your postdoc in his lab, and can you tell us about the focus of his lab?
Yeah, so I also want to start this answer with a little bit of a background, because my dissertation topic with Bruce and my current research area with Ronato are very different fields of study. I am still doing genetics, I'm still doing human genetics, but I'm doing, very different things than I was doing when I was at the Health Science Center.
Mm-hmm.
And when I ended my PhD and I finally, defended the dissertation, I sort of had a little bit of an identity crisis during that time period. My project with Bruce was very focused on building these predictive models of response to opioids, and this was very cool, and it was something that he and I were learning about together. But I went to a conference in 2017, the American Society for Human Genetics, and I heard a presentation from Dr. Mark Daly, who is an astonishing geneticist, talk about autism genetics. And I very quickly realized that if I'm going to study something like drug response or anything related to mental health or metabolism, I need to understand what it means for a trait to be complex, right? It's not something that is a single gene contributing to a trait of interest. It is the entire human genome that contributes some small level of risk to a specific disorder. So that said, I had an identity crisis at UNT Health Science Center, and Bruce was very supportive of me exploring jobs that were outside of the forensic sciences. So I stumbled upon a posting for a position with Ronato at Yale, and it was a very quick process. I applied, we hit it off, we had a great conversation, and things moved forward very quickly. So his lab and now my lab, we study the cause and consequence of genetic variation across the human phenome. So what that means is sort of the collection of traits in the human experience. We are interested in studying how genetics are shared across those traits. One of the really cool things about working with Ronato, even though we're housed in a department of psychiatry, we are first and foremost geneticists. So if we can find a way to link something to psychiatry or mental health kind of more generally, we can study it and nobody's going to question it. So for example, psychiatry and aging is a really big topic area. Psychiatry and cardiovascular disease is a really big topic area. So as long as we can anchor it back to that mental health question as sort of a starting point, it's fair game. So it lets us sort of develop our own interests and diversify the group really, really effectively. And I think one of the other pieces to that question is sort of what drew me to Ronato as a lab, but also as a person, right? Yeah. So I'm actually Renato's first postdoc. So that came with some considerable challenges and some conversations with people at the Health Science Center who have had plenty of postdocs, have had plenty of students, and said, maybe you should consider looking for somebody who has had more experience mentoring students or trainees. But like I said a little bit earlier, I had that identity crisis, and I knew that I was going to need help learning some of these things that were outside of the forensic sciences. And I saw the age similarity between Ronato and I as a really unique opportunity for me to get a lot of one-on-one attention with somebody who isn't bogged down at meetings and conference calls and all that kind of stuff for 9 hours a day and then goes home.
Yeah.
So I had some very honest conversations with Ronato in the beginning and said, I'm going to need help. I'm going to need attention.
Mhm.
I'm going to need you to let me fail a couple times and then help bring me back on track, right?
Mhm.
And all of those things are still true, right? We have very open conversation about um, failure and the age gap and how we battle that in terms of being mentor and mentee. And ultimately, it was the best decision I've made. I truly think that if I had gone to a larger lab, a more established lab elsewhere, I would have been very unsuccessful.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I think that's great. And I'm very excited that you found him and it's going so well. That's hopefully the goal for all students, is to end up in a place they feel as comfortable and have as good of a relationship as you do with him. So I think that's wonderful. I'm going to combine kind of our next two questions. So, per the website about Dr. Polmonti's lab, the overarching goal is to understand the link between the human genome and phenome from multiple perspectives. So in terms of maybe explaining that to the layperson or to, an undergrad or graduate student that doesn't have your experience or your education at this point, kind of what is your research specifically focusing on, or what is your specific role in the efforts to obtaining that goal of the lab?
So I actually thought up of what I think to be a really nice analogy. So I'm gonna
Okay.
try to deliver that because we don't see the DNA, right? So I think sometimes it's really helpful to have this putting this into perspective of something that we have as like a tangible item.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so before the analogy, basically we use computational tools. We are a strictly computational team to discover genetic factors that are associated with a trait of interest. Typically, that's a disease, but it doesn't have to be.
Mm-hmm.
We then use those associated genetic factors to make some conclusions about both correlated traits as well as traits that may have a causal relationship. Um, and this is a lot of statistics, it's a lot of computer science, it's a lot of bioinformatics, but it also requires this fundamental knowledge of biology and human genetics, which I think is really fun.
Yep.
So my analogy for this, to give everybody a little bit of perspective, is if we think about a library as a collection of books, right? The library here would represent the human phenome, or the collection of all of those traits in the human experience. Each book then would represent a single trait. Within each of those books, we have sentences that represent genes, for example, and we have some letters in those sentences that represent the A's, T's, G's, and C's in the human DNA. So my work at Yale so far really focuses on understanding how sentences and letters are shared across books. What I've recently started to explore is how full pages and specific words are shared across books. So we're able to look at slight differences in what changes in a book to actually change the story that's delivered. So if we make those changes, do we see changes in a trait, or do we see some things that may change across traits?
Awesome. Well, as someone that falls into the layperson category, that definitely was a great analogy. So
Thank you.
thank you for that. So kind of on that same path, what is your favorite part about the research you're doing, or, what you're studying, and kind of what has been the highlight so far?
So I really like the flexibility of working in this type of arena. I will say that the work is extremely dynamic and it's really fast paced. So although I'm lumping that into the category of being a favorite, it's also something that I really dislike sometimes. At any given time, I'm probably juggling or working on, at least a full hand's worth of projects. Oftentimes I think it's actually two handfuls, but it's a lot, and the demand is very high. But I think that this really uniquely positions me for when I leave Yale to do things that are also very dynamic and very sort of moldable to what I want to do. But it sort of keeps me excited and motivated. And I think that's sort of a key take home is I like fast paced. So even though I don't like it all the time, it's what I thrive doing. So that's ultimately the best for me.
Absolutely. Well, I know earlier you mentioned mental health and then your focus and your work in mental health. So that's obviously an important topic always, but it's even more relevant in these, difficult and trying times we're in of living through this pandemic. So personally for you, what steps do you take to kind of maintain a work-life balance and focus on your mental health? I saw we had a dog cameo a second
Okay.
ago in the video, so I'm sure he or she is a part of that, but just kind of personally, what are you kind of doing to make sure that you're keeping a focus on your own mental health?
Yeah. So quickly, the dog assumes that every time I'm on Zoom that I'm actually talking to him.
Yeah.
So he gets very excited when he hears my voice when I'm on a Zoom call.
I would be
Um,
disappointed if there was no dog cameo, so we love that here.
so I actually really enjoy being by myself. So this sort of physically distanced guideline for COVID has been not as detrimental, I think, to my sort of personal mental health.
Mhm.
I really like to do things outside that are sort of solo activities. I like to hike, I like to kayak, I like to go camping. The dog obviously, comes with me on many of
Sure, of
those
course.
activities. And that's been a really nice thing to have as like a, you know, he has to go outside, so I have to close my computer at some point.
Mhm.
And that sort of regularity has been super useful for me to keep a schedule.
Mhm.
Um, on that note, I think it's also really important. Like you can see, this is how I dress every day.
Mhm.
I put on normal work clothes as if I'm going to work.
Mhm.
I don't, wear like sweatpants to do my
PJs
job
to the
every
office,
day,
yeah.
which is great, right?
Yeah.
I would love to do that. I
Yeah.
just know that I'm not productive if I do that, right?
Sure.
I feel lazy. I feel tired if I do that.
Mhm.
So um, I've been really good about keeping a routine,
Mhm.
and even though I'm not able to do that routine by physically going to my office,
Mhm.
it's been really helpful for me to just stay focused and on track and sort of in the zone of what it means to be at work versus what it means to have my free time after work.
Mhm.
Um, I also have sort of a weird one that is very reflective of my transition from a forensic science background to what I'm currently doing. I still very much enjoy being a part of the forensic science community. So in what very little free time I do have, I actually still do forensic science research.
Okay.
um, and I know that's still considered sort of work, but it's sort of like pet projects, it's side projects, it's
Mhm.
things that I find really, really interesting that nobody else is working on, nobody's paying me to do.
Mhm.
Um, but it's stuff that like, if it works, that's really, really cool.
Mhm.
And that could be something that I pursue long term eventually. So through that opportunity or through that research initiative, I do a lot of undergrad and grad student mentoring globally.
Okay.
And all of these people are doing, small pieces of larger projects for me from afar. It's been really good for me to do this, but it's also been really good for those students to get some research experience
Mhm.
in a field that they're interested in without having to actually go into a lab space. Everything I
Mhm.
do is on the computer, so as long as we can hop on Zoom or have a phone call, research progress can continue. And that's been really, really cool, I think, for both parties on that end of the relationship.
Yeah, well, I think one of the big things about maybe in the times we're in is still having a sense of connection, with humans and interaction, even if it can't be in physical. So I think that's wonderful that you're using part of this time to help, speak to other students and be a mentor and a connection. So on behalf of them, thank you. I think that's really great. And certainly everything else you said, I think is a really great way to keep yourself. I think routine is key too. So I think you hit the nail on the head there. So our last question to kind of wrap up is simple, maybe not so simple, but what advice do you have for students or anyone really interested in pursuing a career path like yours?
So I've thought of three things here that I'm gonna share with the world. One of them is some academic advice. I have some personal advice, and then I have some career advice.
Okay.
Academically, I know that this is not going to be popular opinion, but regardless of what you're doing, whether you are at the Health Science Center in a PhD program, master's program, DO, MD, PharmD, I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Undergrad, also applicable.
Mm-hmm.
Take a computer science course.
Okay.
I think that we have this really big lack in understanding of how to deal with data of any kind, right? I manage my personal finances
Mm-hmm.
in our studio.
Yeah.
So like that's not something that I need to be a scientist to
Mm-hmm.
do. That's just something that I need to do as like part of my own life, right? That's my livelihood that I have to keep track of.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, you know, you really position yourself in a positive way if you have this understanding of sort of data structure and how to look at information on the computer and how to visualize that information to display it for others to understand your message.
Mm-hmm.
And if it takes something like practicing how to make those figures or statistics or something with your personal finances, do it, because what else are you motivated by other than your own income, right? Like
Exactly.
that's the best way to learn how to do some of these things. It's with something that like personally impacts you.
Mm-hmm.
So my next piece of advice, which is a personal bit, I said some of this in the beginning, but I really, 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 really value this. Do things that make you uncomfortable or fall outside of your wheelhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Also be prepared to fail at those things, because you probably will fail a lot. And then the last one that I don't think is going to be, overly popular, but the biggest favor that you can do for yourself in terms of that failure
Mm-hmm.
is display it. I started keeping a CV of failures, so just a list of
Mm-hmm.
all of the things that I have applied for that I have not received,
Mm-hmm.
the jobs that I've applied for that I didn't receive, the postdoc positions, the papers I've submitted that were rejected, grants, awards, everything that I have not received.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of overwhelming to see, but you can't win if you don't play, right? And unfortunately, submitting those things is part of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not submitting anything, then you're not winning. And if you're submitting things, you're probably failing a lot, which is
Very
great.
cool.
So
Mm-hmm.
the longer the list of that failure, right,
Mm-hmm.
the more likely you are to get something that sticks.
Yeah.
And it's taken me, I left the Health Science Center almost 2.5 years ago, and it's taken me that long to really appreciate some of these failures. So do it frequently and really embrace it, and don't be sad about it. That's the part that's taken me so long.
Yeah, definitely.
So my final piece of advice here for career is sort of stemming from that keeping a list of failures. Really keep track of everything that you do. If you attend a seminar on ethics, if you attend a workshop on how to manage your personal finances, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you apply for an award, even if you don't get it, keep track of all of these things, because the sort of structure of funding early on in your career is only mentored funding. And what that means is that part of your application is you describing to the funding body how you will be trained and how you will be mentored, right? So training doesn't necessarily have to be, what am I going to learn at the bench today? Or how am I going to learn how to analyze this cell line data? It could be learning how to manage race expectations at work. It could be learning how to, do your lab budget. Right? All of those things are also part of your training as a scientist. And I think sometimes those get overlooked in favor of the actual hard science bench skills, or even in my case, the computational skills. So keeping track of all of those things is a really, really effective way to convince others that you are, one, going to be trained effectively, and two, have already received a substantial amount of training.
Well, for one, I've asked a lot of alumni for advice for students, people in the field. And I think that was one of the most unique answers or group of answers I've gotten. I think it's great because, you provided a lot of advice that not just can be taken or heeded by students pursuing a PhD. I mean, I think students in any field of study really could benefit from a lot of the advice you gave. So Thank you for that. I think that was awesome. So that was the list of questions we had. So I want to thank you so much, Dr. Wendt, for speaking with me today. I'm excited to get this out there and to start sharing it. And to everyone that has tuned in, if you have any questions for Dr. Wendt, you can always email the Alumni Association at alumni@unthsc.edu, and we'd be happy to pass anything you would like to say or ask along to Dr. Wendt. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Bye, everyone.